12. As he did each night, General Augustus Malevolent marched the perimeter of the encampment. Also, as he did each night, he studiously observed each detail concerning his men's readiness. Ineptitude meant severe punishment, no matter what the soldier's rank. Yet one thing the general did different this particular night, a single change that went little noticed by most of his weary men. This night, Malevolent made his rounds still wearing the crimson helm of Bardock. That it did not quite match with the rest of his armor did not concern him in the least. In fact, more and more he considered the possibility of finding some manner by which to dye his present armor a color more akin to that of the helmet. Thus far, though, Malevolent had come up with but one method by which to possibly match the unique color, a method that surely would have caused a full-scale insurrection. His hand touched the helm almost lovingly as he adjusted its fit. Malevolent had noticed some discomfort on Galliona's part when he had earlier refused to remove it, but had simply chalked it up to her fear of his growing might. In truth, when both the helmet and the suit became his, the general would no longer need the witch's magical skills, and while her more earthly talents were most expert, Malevolent knew that he could always find a more willing, more submissive female to satisfy his other needs. Of course, such matters of flesh could wait. Lute Ghislaine called to him. He would not be cheated out of it, as he had been cheated out of Vizjun.
But are you worthy of it? Are you worthy of the glory, the legacy of Bardock?
Malevolent froze. The voice in his head, the one that asked on a previous eve the questions that he himself feared to ask out loud, that proclaimed what he dared not yet proclaim.
Are you worthy? Will you prove yourself? Will you seize your destiny?
A faint glint of light from beyond the encampment caught his attention. He opened his mouth to summon the sentries, then made out the murky figure of one of his own men, a dying torch in one hand, coming toward him from that direction. The dim light of the flames kept the soldier's visage almost a complete shadow, even when the man came within a couple of yards of the commander.
"General Malevolent,"
whispered the sentry, saluting.
"you must come and see this."
"What is it? Have you found something?" The sentry, though, had already turned back to the darkness.
"Better come see, General."
Frowning, Malevolent followed behind the warrior, one hand gripped on the pommel of his sword. The guard no doubt understood that whatever he had to show his leader had better be of some import, or there would be hell to pay. Malevolent did not like his routine disturbed. The two wended their way some distance through the uneven landscape. With the sentry in the lead, they crossed over a dune, cautiously making their way down to the other side. Ahead, the dark outline of a rocky ridge loomed over the otherwise sandy region. The general assumed that whatever the guard had noticed had to be out there. If not... The sentry paused. Malevolent did not even know why the man bothered to carry the torch any longer. The pale, sickly flame did nothing to illuminate the area, and if some foe lay ahead, it would only alert them to the presence of the approaching pair. He cursed himself for not having ordered it doused before, but then assumed that if the soldier had not thought to do so, whatever he had brought the general out to see could not be an enemy. Spitting granules from his mouth, Augustus Malevolent muttered, "Well, what did you see? Is it near the rocks?" "It is difficult to explain, General. You must see it." The shadowed soldier pointed at the ground to the right. "The footing is better there, General, if you'll come." Perhaps the man had discovered some ruins. Those Malevolent would have found of interest. The Viserai had a long history in and around Aranak. If this turned out to be the remains of one of their temples, then perhaps it contained some lost secrets of which he could make use. The ground beneath his foot, the ground on which the sentry had told him to step, gave completely away. Malevolent first stumbled, then fell forward. Fearful of losing the helmet, he sacrificed one hand in order to keep it in place, thus losing any chance of halting his fall. The general dropped to both knees, his face but inches from the sand. His right arm, the one that had been forced to support his weight, throbbed with pain. He tried to right himself, but the loose ground at first made it difficult. He looked up, searching for the fool who had led him into this.
"Don't just stand there, you wretch! Help me!"
The sentry had vanished, even his torch nowhere to be seen. Steadying himself, Malevolent managed at last to rise. With great caution, he reached for his sword, and found that also missing.
"Are you worthy?"
repeated the damnable voice in his head. From the sand erupted 4 hideous and only vaguely humanoid forms. Even in the darkness, the general could make out the hard carapaces, the distorted, beetle-like heads. A pair of arms, ending in oversized, sharp pincers, completed the look of an insect out of some nightmare. Yet these man-like horrors were no product of Malevolent's imagination. He knew already of the sand maggots, the massive arthropods that hunted for prey in the wilderness of Aranok, and also knew of one of the few hellish creatures that hunted them in turn, when human prey could not be found. Yet, while scarab demons in great numbers had been rumored to be the cause of caravans lost over the years, never had the commander heard of such creatures lurking in the vicinity of as great a force as his own. While not the largest of armies, not yet, Malevolent's disciplined warriors certainly represented a target not at all of temptation to creatures such as these. They preferred smaller, weaker victims, such as a lone warrior tricked into walking into their very midst. Which of his officers had betrayed him, he would find out when he located the traitorous sentry. For now, though, Malevolent had more important matters to consider, such as keeping himself from becoming the scarab demon's next meal.
"Are you worthy?"
the voice repeated again. As if suddenly prodded to action, one of the grotesque beetles reached for him, its pincers and mandibles clacking wildly in anticipation of a bloody prize. Although not true beasts of hell, despite their name, the scarab demons were certainly monstrous enough foes for any ordinary man to face. Yet Augustus Malevolent considered himself no ordinary man. As the savage claws came at him, the general reacted instinctively, his hand swinging forward to deflect as well it could the attack. However, to his surprise, and certainly that of the creature before him, in that empty hand materialized a blade of purest ebony, surrounded by a blazing crimson aura that lit up the surrounding area more than any torch. The blade grew even as it cut an arc through the air, yet its weight and its balance remained perfect at all times. The edge dug into the hard carapace without hesitation, completely severing the pincered appendage, which went flying to the side. The scarab demon let out a high-pitched squeal and backed away, dark fluids dripping from its ruined arm. General Malevolent did not pause, caught up in the miraculous turn of events. With expert ease, he drove the wondrous blade through the second of his attackers. Even before that monster had fallen, the general turned to the next, forcing it back with his relentless onslaught. The 2 remaining creatures joined with the third, seeking to catch the commander from opposing directions. Malevolent took a step back, repositioned himself, and immediately dispatched the one whose limb he had but moments before cut off. As the other pair fell upon him, the veteran officer twisted, bringing the sword around and beheading one. A foul-smelling liquid sprayed him as he did it, momentarily blinding the general. The final of his opponents took advantage, first dragging him to the ground, then attempted to remove Malevolent's head by biting through his throat. Snarling like an animal, Malevolent blocked the mandibles with his armored forearm, hoping that the plate there would protect the flesh and bone beneath long enough for him to recover. With one knee, he managed to push his monstrous attacker up a bit, forcing the mandibles away. That gave Malevolent the angle he needed. Twisting the sword around in his other hand, the general turned the point toward the head of the scarab demon and drove it through the thick, natural armor of the beast with all the force he could muster. The horrific beetle let out a brief, shrill squeal and dropped dead on top of General Malevolent. With only a slight sense of disgust, the commander pushed the carcass away, then rose. His immaculate armor dripped with the life fluids of the scarab demons, but other than that, they had done him little real harm. He stared at the dark, still forms, both angered at the earlier betrayal, yet also feeling a rush of intense satisfaction for having single-handedly slain the 4 hellish creatures. Augustus Malevolent touched his breastplate, which had become covered with the fluids of the scarab demons. For nearly a minute, he stared at the stench-ridden muck now covering his gauntleted hand. On impulse, Malevolent touched the breastplate again, but instead of trying to wipe his armor clean, he began to spread the fluids further, just as Bartok had done with the blood of his human foes.
So, perhaps you are worthy.
He spun about, at last sighting the night-enshrouded form of the traitorous sentry. However, common sense now told Malevolent that what he had taken for one of his own men surely had to be something far more powerful, not to mention sinister. "I know you now," he muttered. Then his eyes widened slightly as truth dawned. "Or should I say, I know what you are. Demon." The other figure laughed quietly, laughed as no man could. Before the astounded eyes of General Malevolent, the sentry's shape twisted, grew, changed into that not born of the mortal plane. It towered over the human, and where there had been 4 limbs, now 6 materialized. The foremost appeared as great scythes with needle points, the middle as skeletal hands with deadly claws, and the last, serving as legs, bent back in a manner much like the hind limbs of the insect the demon most resembled. A mantis. A mantis from hell.
Hail to you, General Augustus Malevolent of Westmarch, warrior, conqueror, emperor, and true heir to the warlord of blood.
The hideous insect performed a bizarre bow, the sharp points of the scythes digging into the sand.
This one congratulates you on your worthiness.
Malevolent glanced at his hand, now empty of any weapon. The magical blade had vanished the moment it had no longer been needed, and yet the general felt certain that, in the future, he could summon that blade, whenever necessary. "You're the voice in my head," the commander finally replied. "You're the voice that cajoles me." The demon tilted his own head to the side, glowing bulbous eyes flaring once.
This one did not cajole, simply encouraged.
And if I had not passed this little test,
then this one would have been terribly disappointed.
The creature's words caused General Malevolent to chuckle, despite the implications in the response. "Damned good thing I didn't fail, then." One hand reached up to adjust the helmet, while Malevolent thought. First had come the visions, then the increase in his otherwise limited powers, and now this magical blade and a demon to boot. Truly, it had to be as the mantis had proclaimed. Augustus Malevolent had indeed earned the mantle of Bartok.
You are worthy,
the demon chittered.
So says this one. Zazax, I am called, but still one thing remains outside your grasp. One thing must you have before Bartok you become.
General Malevolent understood. The armor that fool of a peasant wears. Well, it comes to me even now from across the sea. Galeona says it approaches Lut Gholein, which is why we march there now. He considered. Perhaps now would be a good time to see what she can learn. Maybe with your aid.
Best Do not speak of me to your sorceress, Great One.
Zazax chittered with what seemed some anxiety.
Her kind cannot always be trusted. They are better not dealt with at all.
Malevolent briefly mulled over the demon's statement. Zazax almost spoke as if he and Galeona shared a history, which, in retrospect, would hardly have surprised the general. The witch dealt with dark powers almost on a continuous basis. What did interest him, however, was that this creature did not want her to know what was now being discussed. A falling out? A betrayal? Well, if it served Malevolent, then so much the better. He nodded. Very well. Until I decide what must be done, we'll leave her ignorant of our conversation.
This one appreciates your understanding.
By all means. The general had no more time to concern himself with the sorceress. Zazax had raised a point of much more interest to him. But you spoke of the armor. Do you know something of it? Again, the foul mantis bowed. Even in the starlight, the general could see the horrendous veins coursing all over its body, veins that pulsated without pause.
By now, this fool has brought it to Lutgolain, but there he can hide it within the city's walls. Keep it from he to whom it truly belongs.
I had thought of that. In fact, General Malevolent had considered it much during the journey, considered it and grown more and more enraged, although he had revealed no outward sign of that fury to anyone else. A part of him felt certain that he could seize Lutgolain and, thus, capture the peasant who wore the armor, but a more practical part had also counted up the losses on his own side and found them far too great. Failure still remained well within the realms of possibility. Malevolent had, in truth, hoped to keep his army beyond the sight and knowledge of the kingdom and wait for the stranger to head out to the desert on his own. Unfortunately, the general could not necessarily trust that the fool would do as he desired. Zazax leaned closer.
The kingdom, it is a strong one, with many soldiers well versed in the art of war. He who has the armor would feel quite safe in there.
I know.
But this one can give you the key with which to make Lutgolain yours. A force most terrible. A force which no mortal army can subdue.
Malevolent could scarcely believe what he had just heard. Are you suggesting? The demon suddenly looked back toward the camp, as if he had heard some sound. After a momentary pause, Zazax quickly returned his attention to the human.
When but a day separates you from the city, we shall speak again. There, you must be prepared to do this.
The commander listened as the demon explained. At first, even he felt repulsed by what the creature suggested. But then, as Zazax told him why it must be so, Augustus Malevolent himself saw the need and felt the growing excitement.
You will do this?
The mantis asked.
Yes, I will. And gladly. Then we shall speak soon.
Without warning, Zazax's form began to grow indistinct, quickly becoming more shadow than substance.
Until then, hail to you once again, General. This one honors the successor of Bartok. This one honors the new master of demons. This one honors the new warlord of blood.
With that, the last vestiges of Zazax faded into the night. General Malevolent immediately started back to camp, his mind already racing, the words of the monstrous mantis still echoing in his head. This night had become a turning point for him, with all his dreams coming together at last. The demon's test and the manner by which Malevolent had passed it paled in comparison to what Zazax now offered. The armor, and the method that would guarantee that it and Lut Gholein fell into the General's hands with little trouble.
Master of demons,
the Mantis had said. One more night to get through. One more night, and the King's shield would dock in the port of Lut Gholein. One more night, and Kara would be alone in the strange land, alone save for her two grotesque companions. She had returned with her evening meal, just as before, and eaten it under the watchful eyes of the two undead. Faustin had remained standing in the corner, the dour Viserai looking like some macabre statue. But of late, Satan Trist had edged closer, the more talkative of the two ghouls, now seated on a bench built into the wall nearest her bed. The wiry ghoul even tried to make conversation with her on occasion, something that the necromancer could have done well without. Yet one subject interested her enough to force her to speak with him for a time, and that subject concerned the ever-elusive Norik Vizarin. Kara had noticed something odd about the way Trist spoke of his former comrade. His words seemed to hold no malice at all for his murderer. Most of the time, he simply regaled her with tales of their adventures together. Trist even seemed to feel some remorse for the veteran soldier despite the horrible acts Norik had committed.
He saved my life 3 times and more,
the ghoul concluded, after being coaxed once more into speaking of his treacherous friend.
Never a war as bad as that one.
You traveled with him from then on? The war mentioned by Trist had apparently taken place in the Western Kingdoms some 9 years before. For men such as these to stick together for so very long showed a powerful bond of some sort.
I saved during Norik's sickness. He left us for 3 months and caught up after.
The rotting figure looked to the Viserai.
Remember, Faustin?
The sorcerer nodded his head ever so slightly. Kara had expected him to somehow forbid Satan from going on with such stories, but Faustin too seemed caught up in them. In life, both men had clearly respected Norik highly, and from what she had heard so far, so now did the necromancer. Yet this same Norik Vizarin had brutally murdered the pair, and revenants did not exist if not fueled by a sense of revenge and justice that went beyond mortal comprehension. These two should have harbored only thoughts of retribution, of the rending of Vizarin's flesh, and the sending of his damned soul to the underworld. That they still felt anything at all other than that struck her quite strange. Satan, Trist, and Faustin did not act at all like the revenants of which legends had spoken. What will you do when you find him? She had asked this question but once before and received no clear answer.
We'll do what must be done.
Again, a response that did not satisfy her. Why shield Kara from the truth? After what he did, even your past friendship must mean little. How could Norik commit so terrible a crime?
He did what had to be done.
With that equally enigmatic reply, Trist's smile stretched, revealing more of the yellowed teeth and the gums already receding. Each day, despite their all-consuming quest, the revenants grew less and less human in appearance. They would never completely decay, but their link to their former humanity would continue to shrivel.
You're very beautiful.
What? Kara Nightshadow blinked, not certain that she had heard correctly.
Very beautiful and fresh, alive.
The ghoul suddenly reached forward, caught a lock of her long, raven-colored hair.
Life's beautiful, more so than ever.
She hid a shudder. Satan Trist had made his intent quite clear. He still recalled too well the pleasures of life. One of those, food, had sorely disappointed him already. Now Hidden in this tiny cabin for the past couple of days in the constant company of a living woman, he seemed ready to try to relive a different pleasure, and Kara did not know how she could prevent him from trying. Without warning, Satan Trist suddenly turned and glared at his friend. Although Kara had noticed nothing, clearly some communication had passed between the two, communication that did not please the wiry ghoul in the least.
Leave me, at least, the illusion.
Faustin said nothing, his only reaction being to blink once. However, that alone seemed to quell his comrade some.
I wouldn't have touched her much.
Trist looked over her once before meeting her eyes.
I just...
A heavy knocking on the door sent him hurrying to the far corner. Kara could not believe her eyes each time the ghoul moved so. She had always read that swiftness could not be termed one of the skills of the undead. In its place, they had persistence and unholy patience. Ensconced next to the Viserai, he muttered,
"Answer."
She did, already suspecting that she knew who it would be. Only 2 men dared come to her door. One, Captain Geronin, whom she had just spoken with but a short time before. The other... "Yes, Mr. Draco?" the sorceress asked, keeping the door open only a crack. He looked uncomfortable.
My lady Kara, I realize that you've requested absolute privacy, but I wondered whether you might join me on the deck for a few minutes.
"Thank you, Mr. Draco, but as I have said before to the captain, I have much to do before we make landfall." She started to close the door. "Thank you for asking."
Not even for a little fresh air?
Something in his tone puzzled her, but the necromancer had no time to think about it. Trist had made it very clear that she should spend no more time outside than needed to retrieve her food from the mess. The revenants wanted their living puppet where they could see her. "I am sorry. No."
"I thought as much."
He turned to leave, then threw his shoulder to the door with such force that the door knocked Kara back onto the bed. The blow did not stun her, but she lay there for a moment, completely bewildered by his actions. Draco fell to a kneeling position just inside. He looked up, saw the ghouls, and blanched.
"By the King of the Depths!"
A dagger suddenly materialized in Trist's hand. The mariner reached for his own knife, which Kara saw lay by his side. Draco had clearly been holding it all along, concealing its presence while he had spoken inanities with the dark mage. All along he had acted with the knowledge that something seemed amiss in the cabin, although likely even Draco had never imagined the sight before him. As Satan Trist raised his arm, a second figure charged into the tiny room. Ceremonial blade held ready, Captain Hannes Geronin shielded his officer from harm. Like Draco, he seemed only mildly surprised at the horrendous figures, but a short distance from him. In fact, Geronin almost looked pleased to see the 2 ghouls.
"I won't let it happen again," he murmured. "You'll not take this one."
Kara immediately understood the captain's words. In his mind, the undead represented that invisible monster that had not only taken his daughter from him, but had turned her into a vile creature he had been forced to destroy. Now, he thought to wreak his vengeance on them. And with the silver-plated sword, he had the potential to do just that. Trist threw his dagger, again moving with a speed his decrepit form belied. The smaller blade sank into Geronin's sword arm, sending the captain staggering. However, the formal naval commander did not retreat. Blood dripping down, the ghoul's weapon still half buried in his flesh, Captain Geronin attacked, slicing at his unliving adversary. His macabre smile seeming to mock, Satan Trist reached for the blade, clearly intending to grab it in his hand. As one beyond death, no normal blade could touch him. The edge of the captain's weapon severed off the 2 lower fingers. Pure agony abruptly coursed through Kara, the pain so great that she doubled over, nearly collapsing. With a hiss, Trist pulled his maimed hand back. Glaring at Geronin, he gasped to his partner.
"Do something, while I still have a head on my shoulders.
Her eyes blurry from tears, the necromancer nonetheless saw Faustin blink once. "Look out!" she managed to cry. A wall of force erupted from her ceremonial dagger, sending both Geronin and Draco flying against the opposite wall. At the same time, the Viserai put his other hand on the wall behind him. A blue haze spread behind the ghouls, a blue haze that grew rapidly in both height and width. The two mariners struggled to their feet. Mr. Draco started forward, but Geronin pushed him back. "Nay, the only weapon that's good for them is this one. I swear I'll slice them both into fish bait. That is, if even the fish'll take something so rotten. You see to the girl." The officer obeyed instantly, hurrying to Kara's side. "Can you stand?" With help, Kara found that she could. Although the pain did not leave her, at least it subsided enough for the enchantress to think and realize what had happened. Through the dagger, Faustin had tied her life to the Revenant's continued existence. The blow that Geronin had landed had not been felt by Satan Trist, who had been long past such mortal weaknesses. However, each successful strike against them would, so it appeared, be suffered by her. And so, with a sword gilded in silver, Captain Geronin had the capability of not only slicing the undead into the bait he had mentioned, but also in the process, slaying the very one he sought to save. She had to warn him. "Draco, Geronin must stop." "It's all right, my lady. The captain knows what he does. His silver blade's just right for dealing with the likes of those. In such close quarters he'll make quick work of them before the one can cast another spell." Draco wrinkled his nose. "Gods, what a stench in here. After you started acting so strangely, Captain Geronin finally recalled what had happened to you back in Gaea Kul and felt certain that something was up. He summoned me to his cabin after dinner, related his suspicions, then told me to come with him and be prepared for hell itself. Although how close to the truth he meant that, even I didn't know." The necromancer tried again. "Listen, they've cast an enchantment on me." "Which is why you couldn't say anything, aye?" He started to pull her toward the open doorway, where several of Geronin's men had gathered. Some had their weapons drawn, but none had yet dared enter, far more fearful of facing the undead than either the captain or his second. "Come on, let's get you away from them." "But that's not the—" Kara stopped, as her body suddenly twisted free of its own accord from the officer. He reached for her arm. "Not that way! You'd better—" To her dismay, the necromancer's hand folded into a fist, then struck her protector hard in the stomach. While not that harsh a blow, it nevertheless caught Draco completely by surprise. Geronin's second fell back, more startled than injured. Kara turned toward the undead and saw the grim Viserai beckoning her to join them. Her limbs obeyed, despite her best attempts to counter his summons. Behind the ghouls, the blue haze had spread to encompass most of the wall. Discovered by the living, the undead now sought to retreat, but with them, they hoped to take their prize. Kara tried to resist, knowing not only that she had no desire to go with the duo, but that the only thing beyond that wall lay the dark sea. Trist and his companion did not need to breathe, but Kara surely did. "Come to me, necromancer," she suddenly heard in her head. The eyes of Faustin stared unblinking into her own, drowning out her own thoughts. Unable to control herself any longer, Kara ran toward the undead. "Lass, no!" Captain Geronin seized her arm, but his wound kept his grip from tightening much. She tore herself free, then reached forth to take Satan Trist's mutilated hand. "I have her," the smiling ghoul gasped. Faustin grabbed his companion by the shoulder, then purposely fell backwards, vanishing through the blue haze and pulling Trist with him. And with Trist went Kara. "Grab hold of her!" the captain shouted. Draco called out something, possibly her name, but by then they were both too late to do anything. The dark mage fell through the haze, and into the suffocating embrace of the sea.